Aces are wild. Las Vegas Aces are now the champions again of the WNBA. We'll get into what this means when it comes to their legacy as a team or a franchise, as well as the great A'ja Wilson. What does it mean for her? We'll get into it next. So the WNBA championships are done. The Las Vegas Aces win in 4 games, a sweep. First time we've had the 7-game series format. And ironically, of course, it ends in a sweep. Of course, that would be the case. But the games were actually very competitive. So even though it might see it's 4-0, there's at least a couple games. Game 3 we'll get into in a second, and game 1, which I'll start there against what happened with Phoenix on that front. But let's start with the victor go the spoils, as they say, and let's get into it. Las Vegas wins their 3rd championship in 4 years. They are now officially a dynasty. It's the 3rd dynasty in the WNBA. First one being the great Houston Comets with the big 3 of Tina Thompson, Cynthia Cooper, and my girl Cheryl Swoops. And then afterwards, we get the Minnesota Lynx headed by, of course, the great Maya Moore. By the way, if anyone wants to do a sports podcast sports documentary on an athlete, that's the one that should be done in this case here. Maybe there's one out there. Who knows? Check your streaming services. There might be one out there, but her story is a remarkable story. But no, let's get into the Aces, who now won 3 of the last 4 championships, and this one being the most inconceivable, I say, of the 3. Just to give context with the Aces, they were 14-14, I believe it was, just after the All-Star break. I think I tweeted out the time after they got whooped. I mean whooped. Got taken to the woodsheds, they would say. Beat by their rivals in the Western Conference, Minnesota Lynx, by 53 points on national TV. And at the time, I pretty much said, yo, things need to change. Becky Hammond may not be long for this job. Boy, I don't know if they heard me or who. They heard a lot of us. But A'ja Wilson, for what Laura says in this case here, she kind of got the troops together. She mentioned it after a post game interview. After the championship, said hey man, she sent the word out, but she didn't have to say much because the whole team knew what needed to be done. But for that 14-14 record, the statistics I believe in this case here is they've won 25 of the last 28 games. I've never seen a team on a run quite like this, and it's remarkable. So, I mean, all due respect, to them. I thought it was, we'll get into more in the series and what I saw there, but just the props of, where they came from being literally on the edge of not even making the playoffs to end up being the 2 seed when it was all said and done. And they didn't have an easy path either. So, props to the Vegas Aces. They are definitely the franchise of this decade. So far and this era, and let's get into then Miss Wilson, A'ja Wilson. I don't think you could put down arguably now she is the best women's basketball player in my mind that I've ever seen. I think of all time. I know in this case it's very difficult with women's basketball to get to kind of give that perspective because. Obviously, you're dealing with, and never mind you're dealing with errors, which every sport has to deal with. But then with the women's side of the basketball, unfortunately, a lot of the great players of the past didn't get the opportunities that you're seeing here to be able to play on, quote, home soil and to see their greatness actually right up close and personal. Cheryl Miller's always going to have asterisks due to her injuries. But, she was fantastic. But I got to say, in this case, in my mind, just on WNBA Mount Rushmore, my Mount Rushmore maybe this season, definitely last season, I would say she was knocking on the doorstep, but it would have been the 2 Comets, Cooper and Swoops, and then I would have had Maya Moore and Candace Parker. That would have been my 4. Folks got other people in this case here, fair enough, but that was my 4. One, I think at this point here, A'ja Wilson's kind of saying, "Hey man, someone got to make room because I'm on that mountain now." And if you have to go strictly to the 4, as a true Mount Rushmore would be, I would say one of the Comets probably have to get removed. If I'm being honest, it would have to be one of the Comets probably. And I think what makes A'ja Wilson so special is not only is she a dynamic scorer and she is so efficient. She's kind of like, for folks that are more NBA fans and from that perspective, let's put it this way. It's kind of like watching it's like watching a more charismatic Tim Duncan in that sense. You know, she's obviously she's a center. Sometimes she might play power forward depending of the year and the situation, the roster. But, you know, she knows her spots in the floor. She very much like Duncan. You put her 15 feet, you know, foul line extended, that's her place where she makes her money. And she was fantastic. They couldn't move her off her spots. You know, she can move without the ball. She's a very good free throw shooter, which Duncan was not actually. So, you know, she has a lot of strengths to her game. And just to give the resume here and why I'm saying that she's on the Mount Rushmore, let's just put it in perspective. First WNBA player ever to have 4 MVPs. She this year, in this case here, had her Defensive Player of the Year again, which I think that gives her 2, maybe 3. I'll last count. But she's co-defensive Player of the Year this year. So she's doing it on the offense and she's doing it on the defense. She also, I think she led the league in scoring. She's pretty close to it. And then also, she ends up with Finals MVP again, which is for the 3rd time. So you look at all these things. I'll put it this way when it comes to A'ja Wilson. It's one of the greatest campaigns I think I've ever seen by any athlete, at least in modern era. I'm going to say modern era going back and say, let's use 50 years. And the reason why I say so is, and I'll give you a few other folks that are in the running. The Tiger Slam, obviously, which I played, that was 2001, I think it was, for Tiger. The Tiger Slam happened. Serena Slam, same thing. I would put that up there with it. I think I would put Jordan, where he won the gold medal, the NBA championship, the MVP for the championship, the MVP of the league. I think he even threw us a scoring title in there. I would definitely have that in the mix. LeBron did the same thing, I think, without the scoring title, but did the same thing with the accolades in this case, winning gold, championship and MVP. I want to say 1 to 2 Miami Heat years, where arguably he might have been statistically, might be the greatest season ever. I think it's one of those. I think it's that second Heat championship where they won 27 games in a row. I think they won it that year in that campaign. But he was like efficiency off the charts, stuff like that. So I would throw that campaign in there. There's a couple other ones from different sports. Djokovic had a run going about a few years back where he lost like only a couple matches all year, won 3 of the 4 Grand Slams. So there's a few in this case here that they're in the running. In the running. I mean, if Brady was able to cap off the Super Bowl for the 17-0, that definitely would have been there. But unfortunately, you couldn't get it done. Sorry, Pats fans, but still a great campaign. But that kind of moves him out the mix from that. So if anyone's wondering why, you gotta win the chip. But this is right there with it, man. She won the gold. Kind of started the campaign. If you want to start it that way, she wins. She wins NBA championship again. She wins the MVP again. She wins Defensive Player of the Year. Co-Defensive Player of the Year this year, and she ends up winning the Finals MVP as well too. Unreal. I said before. Of course, first team All WNBA, which is going to be obvious. So just to give her props in what she's done and her accomplishments in her career is something that you can't take those things for granted when you see greatness like this. You just got to enjoy it and just remember the moments. And unfortunately, too much of us as sports fans don't enjoy those moments when we see that type of greatness. We're always ready to start clamoring and moving on to the next thing. Well, is he or she better than this and that? It's like, man, just marinate in it, guys, and just marinate in the greatness. Let's get into some of the details of how they got there and how they won this championship. I think this championship really, and I tweeted it out, I think, I tweeted it out in game 1, that game 1 really set the tone, and it reminded me so much of the 95 NBA Finals, Magic versus Rockets, where Nick Anderson had 4 free throws, I believe, that kind of iced the game, for Orlando in game 1. And they're controlling the game for the most part, but Houston kept hanging around. And Orlando could not close the door. He missed the 4 free throws. Houston ends up making the buckets to push it into overtime. Of course, Houston wins in overtime. As they say, the rest is history. Orlando gets swept out the building. And this was feeling like that the moment I saw game 1 loss. I said something about Like, free throws in this case are huge. We've seen it before. Um, it's not so much missing free throws, it's when you miss the free throws. And they do have a lingering element to it. Heck, I could go back in this case to game one, in this case, Warriors Cavaliers. You know, Hill misses the free throws. That had extenuating circumstances. All of a sudden, what's his name? JR seemed to forget what the heck he was doing, what time and score was. So you throw, that alone, it has, as I said before, is a special case, but it was the same thing. That went into overtime. Warriors took care of things in overtime, and it was a wrap after that. It kind of steals your soul when you lose games like that. And I saw it with Phoenix when that happened, especially when it's one of your top players and Thomas missing free throws like that. It sticks, man. I don't care what anyone tells me, it sticks. It's kind of like missing a field goal in football late in a game. It has a hangover effect. And you saw it in this case, even though they did play hard, of course they would have. But it always felt like this insecurity that they couldn't close the deal with the Aces. And as the Aces gain more confidence, they too, you can see that you can smell the inevitability of it. Didn't matter what the score was, didn't matter what time and score was. And game 3 comes along. Once again, Phoenix is right there again, right at the precipice. It ends up being tied with about literally a split second left to go, about a second left to go. And then the shot. This one here, let me tell you something. On a side note here, look, WNBA, that shot by A'ja Wilson in game 3, that better be in every single promotion you do till the end of time. Because you all don't do a great job of actually showing your history. That needs to be kind of like the build the lore of the WNBA. That shot needs to be right there with it. Okay? And it's ideally, it was game 3 and it was on a sweep. It doesn't matter, man. Okay? I've seen lore be built out of thinner air than that. Take, for example, men's tennis, Borg McEnroe, Wimbledon, the great tie-break game, the tie-break match for McEnroe. They built lore out of that like no one's business. People forget McEnroe lost the match. Even though I think he won the tie-break. It's like, they don't care in this case here, man. Like, it's about storytelling. That's what it's about. And that needs to be part of your storytelling moving forward, as well as many other things. But that one definitely needs to be right there for modern history. She got her sweet spot, man. Elbow extended right where I said before at the beginning of this pod, and she got to her spot, turn around, boom, a little trickle, and it fell in, game over, and that was the series over. And it's tough, man, because Alyssa Thomas has been the bridesmaid many times, and she can't seem to be able to kick the door down, especially against this team. Usually it's between the Aces and the Liberty. One of the two of them seem to always get her. And it's unfortunate, but, I think in this case here, it's like, I think she might end up being, one of those players where it's like, close, but no cigar on it. So we'll see where things lead with Phoenix in the offseason. Unfortunately, Sabally got hurt there. It was an accident, nothing dirty about it. Wilson, stepping back, stepped on her ankle, and it was unfortunate. But I don't think it would matter in this case in game 4. They had their moments. My girl Copper, I knew she was going to show out in this series. She showed out in this series. And I think that's something that I think that Phoenix, first, and the other thing too, man, on a side note in game 4, Tip is getting tossed with, I don't know what the deal is. I haven't looked at the stuff getting what happened there with Nate, but that was a quick whistle to toss about when you had no technicals. But I'll say this afterwards, and this is something in this case where we'll get into a little bit of a few locker room tapes afterwards because some CBA stuff has come up. This is what Collier's getting at a little bit. Like, you, as a referee, as a referee staff, you got to know when a game feels like it's getting out of control. And after that tossing of the Mercury coach, it had for a few minutes there, it was like it was about to go off the edge. It just had that feeling. I think Rebecca Lobo made mention of it too. And if you watch hoops enough, when you get that feeling. And fortunately, maybe because the game got a little bit, in the double digits a bit more. It was always in double digits, but maybe as time was getting closer to the end, realized that Phoenix might not catch up. Maybe it dissipated by the crowd, but it was hot. It was hot in here. It was hot in there. And I ain't talking about Nelly track. It was getting out of hand, man. So they got to do a better job of reading the room. You hear in this case here, and my understanding is a lot of them are part-timers, and if that's the case, that's definitely something they have to improve on, and then be it through the CBA negotiations or other forms in the competition committee. But anyways, WNBA Finals, the great Asia Wilson gets her third championship. The great Las Vegas Aces are now officially a dynasty, and I'm looking forward to see what comes next year, if we have a next year. And we'll get into that now. Locker room takes, guys. Quick one here. CBA discussions. This came from the great podcast, if you're looking to follow women's basketball, No Cat Space WBB. I'll put it put their link and their tag in the description below. They had a pod just out recently talking about some of the news that came out, and they're reciting an article that came out, and I'm trying to remember which article it's from. I'll put that. I'll mention the article too in the description. But essentially, it was talking about Cathy Engelbert's mismanagement of opportunities for the WNBA in the last 5 years since she's had her tenure. Now, a few years back, Cathy Engelbert had made, she's crowing, she's like a peacock a little bit, saying, hey, man, she was able to acquire $75 million to help with marketing. Where that money's gone to for marketing purposes, I'll leave that up to you. I ain't going there with that. However, the $75 million that she sold, that I remember, and WBB made this point too, and I agree with them in this case here. She was always using it as a form of she raised it, or the W raised it. Come to find out in this article, in this case here, I don't know who knew or who did. Definitely a lot of people did not know. She had sold 16% stake of the WNBA to get that money. I was like, what? I was like, who she gave it to is even more fascinating, because supposedly she has sold it to some of the owners in the league. So if you think it's not, if the CBA negotiations are complicated already with the NBA being involved, you now have ownership groups that have their hands in the pot of the NBA, of course, and the WNBA's owners, and now as this mysterious group now that has 16% of the WNBA. 3 pots some of these teams have. And I'm not sure in this case details of which ones they are, but I think you can kind of figure them out, probably who are the likeliest candidates, since there's only, at the time when this happened, there's only 14 teams in the league, and only a certain percentage of them have ownership there in the NBA and WNBA. So you kind of get a sense of who likely are the likeliest candidates that have 3 hands in the pot, which makes things interesting, because it depends on which hat they want to wear is how they would address these negotiations. Another thing that came out of it as well too was the fact that, I guess based on the worth of the teams that they sold for the expansion teams, be it Toronto, Portland, and of course Golden State right now, a lot of people in this case here in the financial world, in this case in venture capital world, or whatever you want to say, it seems like based on the article, it seems like in this case she undervalued what she potentially could get for these teams, which it's like mind-boggling. I'm like, what? I think in this case here, I think the article mentioned that it could have gotten maybe almost like double to what they got. In this case, the Toronto team was bought for about $150. Same with the Portland team, $75, I believe it was, or so for Golden State, perhaps. Maybe $50 to $75 for the Golden State team. They're like, no, man, this thing could have been like up to $250 million. I don't know what's going on here. Never mind how she's managed, or I should say mismanaged, the whole situation with the Connecticut Sun, which is absolutely ridiculous. I don't know, man. And what it comes down to, the article pretty much when its title says so, that some ownership is losing faith with Cathy. I said it before, I say it again. When I did my last WNBA pod, I said, well, actually a couple pods ago when we started this, when we got into Collier's discussion, I said, hey, look, man, I won't be surprised that when these finals are done, it's a wrap for Cathy. And now the leaks are coming out, and the pressure's going to build. I don't think she makes it through these negotiations. Now, they're supposed to have a deal done by Halloween, October 31st. The odds of that are likely a nada. And just to get some of you guys to understand this in this case, you're thinking some of these ladies in this case are begging. It's like, hey, you should be happy for what they get. Here's the crux of the issue, just for you guys to know. And they can't move any further until they get this sorted out. When the women say, and the WBB guys made a great point about this, check out their podcast, fantastic. But they made the point is when the women say they want what the NBA and what the guys have, they're not suggesting in this case here they expect to be making something like, whatever, 69, 80 million or whatever SGA is making. That's not what they're saying. What they're saying is they want the same model that the NBA has, which is a revenue sharing model. Therefore, when you make an X amount of money, we make an X amount of money. But in this case here, the WNBA leadership doesn't want to do that. They want to stick with things as status quo, which is, we will give you a certain amount of revenue when we hit a certain metric of money that we've made. Now, you say, okay, what's wrong with that? Problem is right now is no one knows what is being made because no one's opening up the books for the WNBA. So no one knows what's being made. So they can dictate whatever the amount is. They can always cry poor and say, we just don't have enough. We just don't. And I say this all the time, and I say this offline to the guys in this case when we talk hoops, and I'll say this to anyone else who will listen. I've never seen a bunch of multimillionaires or billionaires roll up to any sort of potential, to some diminishing or distressed asset that some of you guys like to think the WNBA is, and say, please, I'm at the trough. Right now, there's 9 markets right now looking for a WNBA team. That's not including Boston. 9 markets. And you're going to tell me all these guys are all dumb all of a sudden, made all this money, say, you know what? Nah, we're just going to come and waste our money here at the W. No, folks. They're making money. They're making money hand over fist, probably, is what I'm thinking. And they probably like to keep it that way because they don't want to force them not to have to open the books. This reminds me so much of the deliberations used to happen in MLB in the 80s. Growing up, we used to hear about this in this case here, and you'll hear Miller in this case here, the head of the Players Association, pretty much say, hey, man, it's like, we ain't playing. That's when you used to get strikes and lockouts in this case in baseball. So we're not playing till we see the books. And they had to take them to court for it. And I think this is where this might be heading to. Because if the W don't want to play nice and actually show the books and prove that they aren't making the money they say they're not making, then we're not going to have a season next year. And I can't wrong the players. And to quote Bomani Jones in his podcast the other day with Foxworth, which is so true, is like, you think these ladies ain't about it in this case that they will not play, you're not paying them enough to stick around. Whoop-de-doo in this case here. And some of these folks are getting paid $30,000. And I was like, so what's the deal? I can go and play that in this case unrivaled, probably make as much, if not a little bit less, and find other ways. The stars in this case now, especially the young ones, have figured that they can make money because they're brands on their own. Be it Caitlin Clark or Paige Beckers. I think Angel Reese is going to be the Victoria's Secret thing. They don't care. It's like, from that perspective, they're willing to go all the way to sacrifice for the greater good for their players as far as they're concerned, for the rest of the players union. So they have nothing to lose. Plus, these are folks in this case that ran out a senator, okay, and ran her not just out of Congress, ran her out the league. So you think they're worried about Cathy Engelbert? Like, please, they ain't worried about that. So I think the WNBA, they want to keep this gravy train, because I believe it is a gravy train, because I don't see in this case Joe Lacob just showing up saying, you know what, hey, I'm going to take this distressed asset and put my good money that I've been making all these years through hedge funds, in this case the Warriors, and say, you know what, I'll throw it here, because all of a sudden I just turned dumb. No, folks, they ain't turned dumb all of a sudden. Word is, in this case, the Valkyries are worth over $500 million already after one season. Okay? The Liberty, just about the same. I think according to Jamel Hill in this case here, over $200 million. I think every team's worth over $200 million. And probably rising. Do not be fooled what these billionaires are telling you, these millionaires, okay? And I know a lot of fans like to jump on here because they know the players better, so they always want to demonize the players. Do not be fooled by these folks, man. They're pulling the okie doke on you again. They making money, folks. They making money. Or as I said before, we wouldn't have 9 markets lining up at the trough to get into this league. Never mind the 3 that are already in right now. That's all I got to say for now about that. Believe me, I'm sure there'll be more to say because, as I said before, there's never a dull moment in the W. Anyways, guys, you know where to find me to talk hoops also at Basketball Rewind. Once again, Kenyon, Coach Roach. We break it down. Raptor season's on its way. Woo-wee, y'all gonna get interesting this season. We'll break all that stuff down right there. And also, as always, you can find me on my social media platforms, and that is at that place called X, Blue Sky, and of course Facebook. And right here on YouTube, you can like, subscribe, and comment. I would appreciate it. Love the support, guys. And once again, I'll talk to you next time. Peace.